Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this session. This is a panel discussion, as you can see up here, a panel discussion on innovation. We have, can you all hear me? Yeah, okay, so we were wondering whether or not to have a discussion focused on innovation, and I'm informed by Melanie. This was actually Melanie Pankhurst and Roberto Savatino's main idea some time ago. And I'm told by Melanie actually that when they sort of thought this up, they hadn't actually realized the overall theme of the conference was innovation. So it kind of fits in quite nicely. Anyway, if we could have the first set of slides up. As you'll see here, we have a very distinguished panel. I will introduce them shortly, but I thought I'd spend a few minutes explaining why we decided to do this and try and set it in context. Okay, so I'm Michael Enrico. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Dante. As you can see, our title here is Innovation in the Balance. And what we wanted to do was trying to explore the way in which innovation is generated, especially in large projects such as the Géant project. So, you know, is it a good thing to go it alone, or is it best done in collaboration? I personally expect that we'll find that there are places for both of these approaches. Now, apologies for the use of English proverbs here, but some of the original questions we thought about were, well, do many hands make light work? So is innovation going to come from a lot of people collaborating in a large project, and if so, how? And hopefully we'll address this later on. And then another English proverb here is do too many cooks spoil the broth? So do you have lack of progress if you have too many people trying to innovate on the same area at the same time? And when we were discussing the title of this, this was my contribution at the time. I thought, well, you know, what's the title of this? And I suggested Innovate or Die, because as we all know, innovation is a very important part of what we need to do in research networking, especially these days. You look at all the calls, they all have the word innovation peppered throughout them. The Géant community has long been pioneering network technology and service innovation, and hopefully later on we'll look a little bit about what they might be. Looking back, has this best been done collaboratively or at a national level, or some combination of the two? And we'd like to sort of look at how do the lessons of each approach guide us in how we structure our innovation and discovery as we go forwards in future projects. If you take the combination of expertise, some processes, resources, and people, we obviously have a wealth of networking and middleware technology expertise at our disposal. But are we producing enough innovation? Are the funders getting value for money? And if so, if they're not, how can we improve on that? So these are the sort of three areas where you would see innovation, research, development, application. Do we have the funds to do the job properly? Are we harnessing the needs and knowledge of our users? And what are public-private partnerships? We hear a lot more about those these days. So what does innovation mean? Because it could mean different things to different people as well. And I'd like to sort of explore that briefly. So here's the dictionary definition of innovation: something new or different introduced. And the act of innovation is the act of innovating is the introduction of new things or methods. Okay. I just wanted to talk a little bit about a classic innovator. Does anybody know who this is? Any offers? Don't say Isaac Newton, because it's not. Any offers? This might give it away a little bit more. If anybody who listened to music in the 1970s, any offers? It is, well done. It's Jethro Tull. And so this should give it away. That's an album cover from Jethro Tull. But Jethro Tull was an agricultural innovator in the 18th century. So he invented the seed drill. And what I wanted to do here was try and talk a little bit about the difference between innovation and invention. So he invented this. But more generally, this led to a lot of innovation in farming at the time. So essentially, it played a key role in the agrarian revolution in Britain, which then paved the way to the Industrial Revolution. Here's another famous innovator. Any offers on who this might be? Here he is with some equipment. Well done, it is indeed. Guglielmo Marconi. I introduced him because he was an innovator as well. So he didn't necessarily, he spent a lot of time improving the performance of coherers that were used in the receivers and wireless receivers at the time. And then I also introduced him as well because he was key in making an innovative transatlantic leap, as we've been hearing about an innovative transatlantic leap that's been going on during this conference. And he did that as he was the first person to transmit a wireless signal across the Atlantic, and this is down in the southwest of Cornwall, close to where I come from, where he did it from. So if you go there now, by the way, you'll see a monument like that on the cliff top. You won't see those masts. Okay, so where is innovation? Where is the innovation balance? And we want to look at this in terms of the differential with the commercial sector, as we see this diminishes year on year in terms of production of innovation and innovative solutions. So essentially, this is the quest of our panel. So through some lively, hopefully informed discussion, then we will sort of address some of these points. And they all bring a diversity of experience to this. So I'd just like to, as kind of shorter time here, so what do you want from this panel discussion, and then I'll introduce them to you. So to work out the merits of different ways of aspects or factors of research programs and process, we want to try and discuss different ideas and new ways of looking at how a project might do research or apply innovation, to ensure views and experience from different environments or organizations, to assess the value of the commercial viewpoint. So anyway, yes, that's where, to ultimately bring a richer pool of ideas for research and innovation in the GEON project, and hence to enhance its success. So let me introduce our panelists briefly. If anybody, by the way, Aphrodite said to me that if you Google for the word innovation, then you get a lot of graphics, and I'm afraid we stole quite a few of the ones that she was going to use here. So innovation can sit in this intersection here between these 3 points here, of what is desirable for users, what is possible with technology, and what is viable in the marketplace. Anyway, so finally, allow me to introduce our speakers, our panelists. We have Jean-Luc Dorel from the European Commission. So he has a commercial background, and he is currently the EC project officer for GEON. Nicole Gregoire from SurfNet, who is the community manager for research. Aphrodite Savasti from GRNet as the Chief Business Development Officer, and also in GRNet, and also the leader of the GRA2 activity in GN3+. Michael Stanton from RNP, the Brazilian Research Network. He's the Director of Research and Development there. And we also have Jeff Bennett from Industry, so he's from Infinera. He's the Director of Solutions and Technologies. So we've asked each of them to make a bit of a contribution here, a few slides to make a few points they wanted, and then I think we'll have a short gap between each of the presentations. People can ask a question, make a point, we'll make a note of that, run through the presentations, and then have a more open discussion later in the discussion. I found this diagram as well, so hopefully we'll put this up here during the discussions later on. This was, again, the result of a Google for the word innovation, and I thought it would help us a little bit. Okay, so without further ado, I think I would like to ask our first speaker to come up. So it's Jean-Luc. We can swap on to Jean-Luc's slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the invitation to speak to this panel and the trust that the Commission can innovate in speaking about innovation, which is, well, probably the challenge I will try to put to myself this afternoon. So talking about innovation, it's a quite trendy word inside the institutions today. There is this impression that over the past framework program, funding programs, this bit which is related intuitively to products and services has been somehow not so successful. So it's, there is a number of efforts at the EU level for pushing that. As an example, there is a renaming of the organization in charge of research from research and development to research and innovation. And it's not just semantic change of the title, but it's also a push from policymakers for innovation. This translates into something called Innovation Union, which has been discussed, agreed some year ago. And this is the place where all policies related to innovation are taking place. And within this framework, you will find many things, but I took some words, keywords from this policy. You will find policy around skills. You will find policy on open access, which is very high on the political agenda. Mobility of researchers, how to make sure that we are breaking walls within institutions, within organization and disciplines. The knowledge circulation, where I think Géant can play a strong role in exchanging information and data across borders. Everything related to intellectual property, patent, the patent union. Standardization is very high on the agenda too, as a way to minimize the risk of non-interoperability, as a way to ensure a market, a trusted market for investors and vendors, producers, to make products. Regulation as a way, or more precisely, removing obstacles for innovation. There are many things that can be simplified. Access to a stimulation of risk investment, both private through venture capitalists and leveraging some guarantee funds that would allow them to access to funding, but also from the public sector through a range of risky instruments. And finally, the role of public sector is elaborated, where there are some horizontal action towards SME, but also the public sector, if you take it as a whole, is one of the largest procurer in the market, but it's so fragmented that today it's not viewed as pushing innovation. So there are some instruments there. This effort is now implemented in a number of activity. Sorry, I forgot to mention that at the top level, the framework that will fund all these activities is called Horizon 2020. So Horizon 2020 is the next program that will fund those policies. So in a nutshell, the Horizon 2020 is around 3 main priorities. So that's it, 3. One is called societal challenges. This is where we are going to fund across boundaries, across disciplines, a number of actions in terms of health, transport, energy, climate, etc. There are 6 of them, and this is where we are going to fund industry and academia to solve some of these challenges. So it's a condensed effort. Then we'll have something called enabling technology. So it's to help having a competitive industry. So it's nanotechnology, it's electronics, photonics, biotechnology, etc. And the final one is called excellent science, and this is where you have horizontal action supporting science to be excellent. To simplify, because I see time is running, this is where Géant is funded as part of research infrastructure. So this is the big picture, which is then implemented in terms of each policies. For the digital policy, ICT policy, there is an effort that is made a number of actions are taking place. There was a workshop some time ago, and I just took the agenda of this workshop, and I will just pick two of them. Prizes, there will be a mechanism for encouraging prizes. It's where we invite people to do something, and the best will obtain a financial reward. It's not an easy task, but I'm inviting you and the community to think about this kind of instruments for stimulating innovation. The other one is pre-commercial procurement, as well as public procurement of innovative solution. This was already suggested in Géant 3+. This is a way to stimulate, in the case of pre-commercial procurement, to stimulate research to get a product, to get a new product. The other one, the procurement of the public procurement of innovative solution, is a way to it's a way for procurer to adopt new solutions, to be early adopters. So it's, if you do a spectrum, the one is research, and then you are moving to early adopters. So that's instruments, and the community will be invited to reflect on that, and I'm more than happy to establish links with the colleagues that are on this slide. Now, if we'll go down to the project level, and I'm happy to share some experience that I had with the, 100 projects I had in my past at the Commission. There are some balances and there are some equilibrium to be found and to be aware of when we have this project. And from this experience, so for instance, there is this notion of research, there is this notion of development. This is a whole spectrum, so we have to know where we are exactly. And the point I want to make is that depending on where you are doing different kind of job. And it's known that, and I've seen that in project, when you have small teams, small project, geographically in the same place, you obtain as much, if not better, solution that a very diverse, big team of people, but very scattered and geographically dispersed. So there is a call for doing small thing when it comes to development. And the other evidence of it is that Google has a special team that function is to multiply the number of connection between workers during their working day in order to increase the exchange of information, increase the capacity to build solutions together. On the other side of the spectrum, there is research where there is a relatively larger time frame and time for reflection, and where diverse team and very scattered team are not a problem. We have even papers of people, articles where people didn't meet. So I think it's important to know where we are when we do this. There is the classical dichotomy between operation and innovation, where you have innovators, pioneers that want to be, well, the first to have the first solution on the market. On the other side, you will find people that are concerned with the operation, that are concerned with the manageability of the problem, of the solution, the scalability, the robustness, how deployable is it, etc. So this dichotomy is clear. So we have to establish a healthy dialogue between those individuals, and I'm sure trust the community to be able to have this dialogue. And there are individuals that have, and I've seen some very successful individuals that has the two angles. So one might also reflect on the type of innovation services is being done. It can be developing a core technology, so protocol, a new routing algorithm, or integrating pieces. It's different type of skills, different type of works. And you don't need the same person to do that. You can think about the scalability. There are solutions that are limited employment, so you are not bothered with how easy to implement, to configure, etc. While if you are talking about large scale, you will put a lot of emphasis on that. And if I take EduRoam, I understand it's now with some additional tools much easier to deploy. So deployability is important in that case. There is a classical dichotomy between technology push and user pull. So we are talking about user, yes, it's important. But if we look back, it's not always users that are innovative. They are, and they are pushing the envelope. But take the internet itself. If you bring together people in a room in the mid-70s, I don't think anybody would have said, I want the internet. The internet was made for solving some problem, which required to remove states inside the network to ensure robustness. And I doubt some user will have expressed any such requirements. Besides users and technology, you have also to consider funders. I will not spend too much time on that, but the point I can make is that the money is in scarcity today, so innovation can also come from lack of money. And I will finish by taking the example of Géant and consider that there are a number of innovations that could be identified for the future. I will not go through it. But it's not only technical. So I think we can also explore legal innovation when it comes to edugain, how to make sure that data protection can be ensured in a scalable way. But it also, for instance, skills and human capital, how to make sure that we are removing walls between organizations. And it can also be policy innovation. Géant, as an infrastructure, is serving researcher, but it's an internet infrastructure, and it's getting closer to a lot of policies that are made in governments, digital agenda, digital divide, broadband, data protection, the evolution of the internet itself, future internet, security, critical infrastructure, reaction to events, and this has become core business of governments. It's a time where government people understand those issues, understand what is IP, understand that is key for the country and for the government. So I would also call for policy innovation. Brussels has a role to play in that case. So there is for you a reflection to have to understand how you can position yourself, be proactive rather than be procrastinate and suffer from events. So in a nutshell, I think the community of Géant has a lot of strengths and should focus on these strengths. It's a multi-domain cooperative environment. And there is a big expectation from a funding agency that this should innovate because you have the right condition for this innovation. And you have the people. So ultimately, this is about people. There are a lot of renewal inside those organizations, the community, and I'm very happy to see that in this panel there are two energetic and young women that are leading some of this change. So I will conclude on that. That's the best investment that you can make is probably on people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manu. Thank you. So in the interest of keeping to time, I think I'm going to ask our next speaker to come up at this point. If you do have a particular question or a particular point you wanted to make to what Jean-Luc just said, please hold it in your mind, and I think we'll come back to them a bit later. So can I ask our next panelist to come up, please? So that's Nicole Gregoire from SurfNet. If we can have her slides up, please.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you for the invitation to this panel. I work as a community manager research at SurfNet. And as a community manager, I organize various activities to engage researchers in our innovation projects. Which one? Okay. To me, innovation is a catalyst for growth. Growth in value, technical growth, economic growth, etc. To be innovative and stay innovative, I believe in the power of collaboration. But it's not only the NRENs that must collaborate. Oh. As an NREN, we connect various types of endpoints. We connect individual end users, universities, academic medical centers, and service providers. We need to involve them in our innovation activities, and this is not always trivial. Why would a commercial service provider connect to our R&D network if that does not add direct value to their business case? I would like to give an example. I have a lot of contact with researchers working in the genomics domain. They do their research in the Netherlands, obtaining DNA samples from individuals, and send these samples to a sequencing company in the USA. What they get back is sequence data stored on hard disks, put in suitcases, and shipped by FedEx. They have to unscrew the hard disks and put them in their own storage cluster before they can even use the data. This process takes a lot of expensive research time. Together with our users, we believe that this process could be faster and more efficient by transporting the data over a dedicated light path between the commercial provider and the Netherlands. We offered the service provider a free light path connection for tryout. They only had to make the arrangements for local infrastructure. At first, they liked the idea. It would generate a lot of publicity for them because it would be an innovative way of transporting data in this domain. But in the end, the deal was called off because it did not add any direct value to their business case. So innovation, yes, but we cannot innovate alone. We need commitment from our users and service providers to innovate together. Looking at innovation within Xinjiang, I would like to give an example of a very recent success. Last Sunday, and I was there when it happened, for the first time a transatlantic 100 gigabits per second transmission link for research and education between North America and Europe was demonstrated. In order to achieve this, 6 NRENs from Europe and North America and 2 commercial partners joined forces. A large team of people from 10 different organizations working across 9 different time zones worked hard to make this happen, and without them, this breakthrough for the R&D community would not have been possible. This leads me to one of the statements I would like to make. In order for the Xinjiang community to remain at leading edge, the way to go is to give room to partners who have the resources to run in the forefront and let them pioneer. Once innovation is or seems successful, it is important to make the results available to those who were not able to participate. Enabling innovation will not increase the digital divide, provided that the knowledge is shared. There's one last thing I would like to point out at the start of this discussion. You will not win the World Cup with only Messi in your team. Innovation at the collaborative level is teamwork. You need a balanced team, a common goal, trust, passion, and a lot of patience. Thank you.
So I've heard a few things there. If Nicole, if you'd like to join the panel, you can answer. I'd like to stop at this moment and actually just get a few, see if there's any questions from the audience or anybody who wants to make a few points. So Nicole has talked about allowing those that can do it best to go ahead and do it, and then they share their results with others. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to make a comment on some of what Nicole has said, or even Jean-Luc at the beginning? If you do, then a microphone will come your way.
Thanks. I'm Catherine Antonison from Canary, Canada's NREN, and building on what you just said, we are doing that exact thing in building our research middleware. So some above-the-net services that we're leading the development of in Canada, as I think in most jurisdictions there's no central body that develops research software. So what we've done is we're funding the development of specific software services. So building a toolkit of the best visualization tool, the best data harmonization tool, the best series of specific algorithms for a specific domain, and making those available out to the broad research community. So as they're building their specific platform for astrophysics or microbiology or what have you, they can accelerate that process and pick the best of the best from a toolkit that's been developed already. So I think that aligns nicely with what Nicole was talking about.
Thank you. Is anybody, Jean-Luc talked about prizes actually at one point. Is there anybody that would like to to make a comment on that, because we have, for example, the open calls in the Géant project at the moment. And one element of that is, if you like, a prize to fund the most innovative, more or less wild card bid we get to do something with the network. So, anybody comment on that particular aspect? No? Okay, I'd like to call on Aphrodite Savasti at this point, because she has a great deal of experience in trying to herd innovators within a big project. So she's the activity leader, has been a joint research activity leader for many years now in the Géant project. So Aphrodite, please.
So it is actually 8 years and a bit more at the moment. So in these years, I have led quite a few teams who were working in the research area of the Géant project, and I have seen ideas from the very first days of their conception all the way up to being today rolled out in the NREN environment and our user community. And it's very interesting. Okay. It is very interesting to see how in Géant we have this marvelous environment for innovation, because we have full control of the infrastructure itself. We don't buy or rent infrastructure from somewhere else. The infrastructure is ours to use and manipulate in many possible ways. We have these wonderful capabilities of people and what the equipment can do for us, what software can do for us. And we also have direct access to the widest range of user communities from all different aspects of research and arts and many sciences. And this environment creates a scene where the teams of Géant can innovate and can be creative. And Michael asked us to include a statement in our lightning talks about what is the most important thing for us in terms of innovation. And for me, innovation is the vision that drives my teams to go ahead and think creatively and be motivated to work hard to achieve many things and many new products and services. So how do we work? We get ideas from people. We have a close look at how the standards are evolving. And we also have our agendas. We have our business development plans in Géant. But all of these create a very interesting mix of inputs and ideas, and they result into outputs of the teams in the Géant project in improving and innovating in our organizational capabilities, innovating in how we manage interaction between the several players, but also tool sets and services and capabilities that we deliver to our end users. And you see how this fusion drives the innovation within the project. Currently, we have split our research activities in Géant, the GN3+ project, which is now running in 3 areas. One of them is called Network Architectures for Horizon 2020, and this is supposed to study how the future of NRENs in terms of capabilities, structure, engineering will be. There is one area which I'm currently leading and has to do with technologies in the service of specific applications. So we believe in service differentiation per application, and we see a lot of innovation coming out of this. And the third area has to do with upcoming aspects of authentication and authorization. We see innovation as a multifaceted challenge. We understand that in terms of business development, you can innovate if you think in the direction that one size does not fit all, and you always look for specialized cases, specialized requirements, new paradigms of service delivery, new service models. We have the privilege, as Jean-Luc mentioned earlier, to work in an environment where we can also innovate on operations. We are always constantly pushed to federate our operations and invent ways of doing that in an efficient manner. We're a multi-domain environment, after all. We're always struggling to innovate also in management of our services and our infrastructures. We are an environment where management of the resources has to be delivered as a service to our community, because most of the times our researchers, our teams, our users want to be able to handle parts of the management themselves, and this is by itself a big challenge for us. And of course, many innovation opportunities in engineering, terabit capacities, the 100 gig circuits that Nicole just mentioned, on-demand capabilities, EduROM. There is a long story of opportunities and results in this aspect. But there's also a lot of questions that we're always trying to answer. How to best combine user requirements and organizational technical capabilities within the consortium. How to balance diversity and originality, especially since we're still judged by the quality and the stability of the environment and the capabilities we provide. How to make sure worthwhile ideas do not go under the radar. And one very interesting question that has come up recently is how to concretely measure innovation in Géant so that maybe next year in TNC we can give you some indicators of how we're doing. Would it be by scientific papers, influencing standards, having prototypes coming out of the research in the project and being used by services and so on. And hopefully this discussion today will give us some useful input to go ahead with our efforts. Thank you.
So Aphrodite touched on two things there, and I would like to ask the panel here if they have any thoughts on measuring innovative output, because that's a tricky one. We had a lunch yesterday, and we were thinking, well, what points we really want to make sure we bring out here. So has anybody from the panel have Jean-Luc, for example?
I could try. The number of failures.
Ah, okay. So you're suggesting that we don't actually allow, maybe we're too risk averse, is perhaps what you're referencing here, actually. And
that was a proposition for a measurement. And if you ask me the question in Géant, how you would rate it, I would probably rate it very low, because there are no failures as far as I can see. So it's not for me a good sign.
Okay, so we're too...
Because I've seen so many projects inside my career that are very successful. So that doesn't mean there are not lessons learned from errors.
Okay, right. Anybody from the audience, do you have any comments on whether or not we're too risk averse within a project like the Géant? We have over here, please. Can we bring the microphone over?
Hi, Melanie Pankhurst from Dante. I think what I wanted to know is, the risk adverse, that there is, I think it was a bit touched upon, the balance between actually, we're given public funds to do a job and we want to be successful and nobody wants to be seen to fail as such. So obviously you don't, but possibly there is, I'm not from the technical side, I better give a caveat to that, so I may not be speaking completely in turn, but from where I sit, sort of looking on the marketing point of views and the funding point of view, you don't want to be seen to be wasting funds on chasing development or research on something that may not result in anything at the end, because that could be seen as failure, and Jean-Luc may not like that when we come to speak to him at the end of the year. So it's how to get the balance and what is acceptable. So perhaps there is dialogue that we need to work on when we're getting our money on what is acceptable failure.
Any thoughts on that, Jean-Luc?
Well, we can elaborate a little bit more. I would be extremely embarrassed to say to my boss that the investment in EduConf as a deployment is a failure, because as a deployment, as a service, it requires a big investment. Now, I would be happy to tell him that a number of ideas has been tested and failed, where the investment is much smaller. You just test idea. I have an idea, we have an idea. Let's try it. Maybe let's see what is the best of those ideas, because we cannot fund many of them. And from this ecosystem, a number will be a success. So I guess it's a call for taking risks at the early stage, but not the later stage. And even it's a call for, at each step of the process towards the end products, to have a check and to have a conscious business decision to go or to stop.
So thank you, John. Maybe we shouldn't be afraid to come and say in the annual review, well, we tried this and it didn't work. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to ask up our next panelist, actually, Michael Stanton. So maybe he can also give a view, actually, at some point on how things are in Brazil in terms of risk management, so how you feel about that particular point. But in the meantime, Michael has his some slides and he'll talk to us for a few minutes. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
It's there.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to thank Michael for the invitation to be here. And I thought that it might be helpful to say a little bit about what is my organisation, RNP, just to set the scene, as we're not part of the European community of networks. RNP runs the Brazilian NREN and was created a long time ago now, more than 24 years ago, as a government project for higher education and research. And it's operated the first national IP backbone in Brazil in 1992 with connectivity to global networks from then. We've also historically participated in setting off the commodity internet in Brazil, starting in 1994. But in 1999, RNP, the leadership of RNP, retreated from the commercial internet and re-established itself as a research and education network as a company rather than a project, and is now supported quite generously by 4 ministries in the federal government. We currently serve about 900 campi of about 400 institutions with we estimate about 2 million users, about 1% of the population of the country. What you could conclude from this is that RNP has reinvented itself in the past, and it continues to do so. We've been in a phase of reinvention for the last 3-4 years now, essentially forced by outside things, but also internal organization of new users, new technologies, new applications. I'd like to talk a bit about some examples of innovative activities which we have been carried out in the last few years. Some of this is natural. It's to do with networking, building our own optical infrastructure, for instance. We've copying quite blatantly the Canadians and the Dutch. We started building out our own networks, but we had to sort of discover how to do that in Brazil. And so this has been going on for some time. We also have some long-distance networks which are our responsibility. Some of these are for experimentation use, some are for production use, but they've been built, designed, operated by ourselves. The main thing which I like to talk about is about what use you put the networks to, which is developing services with ideas, and it doesn't mention here, but it's important to mention manpower from the research community in the country. RNP does not develop things itself. It manages the development of work done by other people, principally in the universities. And there's a list of some of the products which I mentioned, which I've got slides on in the next few things. I will pass very quickly through this, just to give an idea of the range of this. This process has an open call annually to receive proposals from the research community. They are the ones who have been helping us to determine which direction we've been going in. And we have occasionally directed some of these, but generally we have no restrictions on what may be proposed. And some of the things you'd recognize as being the kinds of things you'd do anyway. This, for instance, is to do with ID management. We have our own PKI system, which is developed by a group at three of our universities. We have Federation which is integrated to EduGain. These have been developed locally. We have various schemes for using video for assisting remote teaching. This is one of them. We have a scheme of operating Wi-Fi networks with intelligent control. Instead of having to buy this stuff from a well-known manufacturer, we can use low-cost domestic stuff for this, and well, not only domestic base stations. MConf is a substitute. We're hoping will substitute Adobe Connect for our community. It will work on tablets and desktops and notebooks and even telephones. This is from our group who have been into high-resolution video, 4K. They've developed their own technology for codecs, for transmission, storage, and so on. And this is an example of a live surgery in 4K, which was taking place about a month or two ago. And there's, the same group has also produced a more extensive model for integrating different outputs from the medical area. This is a useful area in which one can assist with technology, what is going on. It is widely been used in teaching within the university hospital community in Brazil. The last example is a user-friendly interface for dynamic circuit provisioning, which uses Google Maps as a basis for identifying where the endpoint should be, and then you can just sort of click on this and to set up your circuit. We have, as a result of this development, ended up or progressed to collaborating formally and informally with many other networks within South America, in North America, in Europe, and more recently in the Far East. And these have been important, and Africa also, excuse me. And this has been a direct result of, I think, the activities we've been undertaking, and we've been seeking out collaborations in foreign parts for these activities. And the final slide, saying, you know, what do we think is the importance, or what do I think is the importance of innovation for us? It's innovation is developing better services for our users in collaboration with our research community, as I mentioned. And this has the result of facilitating collaboration nationally, internationally for our research and education users. It certainly has increased links with our local research community, because they're the people who drive this activity. We are able to collaborate globally with networks, similar networks in other parts of the world. And we have, obviously, to maintain a competitive advantage relative to commercial alternatives within our country. And this is certainly a help to do this. Thank you.
So I heard a few things there. Two things I picked up on were reinvention, transformation of the NREN, and I think we're seeing that going on now here in Europe quite a bit, and a lot of outsourcing. And as I mentioned before, in the Géant project, there's this open call element, and I guess Jean-Luc knows better, but I am imagining that in the future there'll be more of this in GN4, for example. There'll be, I imagine there'll be a bit more emphasis on this notion of outsourcing through open call. And clearly it's been very successful in RNP. In fact, I was down in Brazil fairly recently, and I have to say I was very impressed at the diversity of the work that was going on through your technical programs, Michael. Okay. Any comments on what Michael was talking about there? Any comments on transformation of an NREN and how they might use that to be better innovative? Or the other theme he mentioned was collaboration as well. Anybody want to make a point there? Yeah, we've got someone over here.
Yeah, this is one for Michael Stanton. Michael, when you were last in Dar es Salaam at the UbuntuNet conference, you were giving an overview of the services that RNP had developed. And you also gave an overview of how you dealt with a failure in the development of the services. So I would really just like to hear your point on the one that was bouncing back and forth between Melanie and Jean-Luc on how you and RNP deal with failure.
Yeah, press the button, please, Michael.
We have a process for dealing with, accompanying the development of these projects, and they're subject to fixed review at the end of each year to decide whether they're going to continue, and typically they last for 2 to 3 years. And if it is the panel that is assembled to judge this includes outside people also, including those that selected these projects in the first place. So it comes back to them in the end. And we decide whether or not they will continue or not. And if it doesn't continue, okay, then we suspend this activity, and we can get a new one to start in using the same funding for the following exercise. So we currently maintain 8 parallel projects. Usually these are 4 in its first year, 4 in their first year, 4 in their second, or something like that, and they use a 2-year cycle to produce something which is usable, which then can be passed on to our services group for them to shape it into a professional service. And I say usually this is 4 and 4, but if 4 don't finish, then we have more funding for new ones the following year.
Any comments from Jean-Luc on? We kind of vaguely directed that question at Jean-Luc as well. So
we have to learn from other experiments,
okay,
for sure.
Okay.
So that's it.
Okay. Right, I would like to actually ask the question. I think I'll ask Jeff to come up first and speak because Jean-Luc touched on industry participation, and he also touched on something else, which is about standards. So I'll maybe reserve that for after Jeff has spoken. So thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for the invitation here. So I'm going to get right into this with a famous misquote from history. This poor gentleman was the US Commissioner of Patents at the turn of the 20th century, and he's famously misquoted for saying everything that has been invented, that can be invented, has already been invented. Now, you don't get a job like that with an attitude in that way. So this is something that he actually did say, but he definitely felt that invention and innovation spawns further invention and innovation. And that's really what I'd like to talk about, because I think a lot of people think ideas and innovations are like a bowl of nuts. Like, I particularly like cashew nuts. So if I go to a bar, I will look for the cashew nuts in the bowl of nuts. But every time I take a cashew nut out, there's one less cashew nut left in the bowl, so I have to search harder next time. So are ideas and innovation actually like that? Well, I certainly don't believe it. I don't think they are, unless they're like an endless bowl of nuts. Because what's happening is that the more ideas and innovation are shared, the more they are created. It's almost like a chain reaction. And the place, of course, that we share those ideas and innovation is the internet. So really the focus of what I'd like to present here is how we can provide a way to do this. Now, I'm not going to labor this particular slide because you all know that the internet is growing. There is a fantastic report, actually. It was published by IEEE 802.3 last year. It's like a meta-survey. It contains a host of different reports on various aspects of internet growth. You're free to download this. It is free of charge. I'd also like to steal from a fantastic paper written back in 2006 by Professor Emmanuel Desivere. And this is a paper, by the way, that if anyone is looking for an idea of a paper, an academic paper you would like to write, it's a refresh of this paper. But what Desivere talks about really is total fiber capacity. And that is actually a function of the data rate per wavelength and the number of wavelengths that you can support on a fiber. And the interesting thing is that these are capacity and distance. So the total fiber capacity and the distance that you're trying to transmit are actually antagonistic variables. In other words, if you try to increase one of them, you will end up decreasing the other, typically. But a theme that we've actually covered on the panel already, or that we've touched upon, is how do you measure innovation? So I'd like to propose that a general trend for DWDM innovation is to increase the product of capacity and distance. And we can actually measure that historically. Desivere does a fantastic job of it. I've stolen one of his diagrams here, one of his charts, where he documents the increase in DWDM innovation for the 20-year period before the paper was published. And if I just take a few highlights from this chart, one of the things we have to do is to make sure laser technology is operating at the right wavelength. Optical fiber is made of glass. Glass has its minimum attenuation around about the 1550 nanometer mark, so you have to start building lasers that operate in that range. There's a whole range of other innovations that we have to go through. WDM involving multiple waves per fiber, handling dispersion anomalies in the fiber, working with amplification technologies, working in different wave bands beyond the C band. The L band's always been a little bit unpalatable for most service providers. They don't like it very much, but it's there if we need it. So all of these are documented in Desavier's paper, but it was published in 2006. What kind of innovations are in production today that have taken place since that 2006 publication date? Well, one of them is large-scale photonic integration. Now, this is where we take lots of optical components and we compress them, collapse them onto a single chip. The thing is, photonic integration on its own doesn't do anything for either capacity or distance. What it does is enable lots of other technologies that do make a difference for capacity distance products to be operationally scalable, to use less power, to be more reliable, and so on. So the kinds of technologies I think we could look at include polarization multiplexing, complex modulation, and coherent detection. If you take the three of those together, they actually deliver a roughly 10 times increase in the capacity distance product from using non-coherent techniques, the previous techniques. And the three of those technologies have essentially enabled the 100 gigabit revolution that we've seen probably in the last year or so. Add to that advances in soft decision forward error correction, which is a technology that detects bit errors but also corrects them without retransmission of that data. It's a very, very clever technology, and again, it gives us roughly 2 times increase in the capacity distance product compared with not using, or compared with a hard decision forward error correction, which predates it. So all of these are technologies that have been introduced since the publication of that paper, but they're actually in production systems today. So I'd just like to finish off by looking at what's happening on the horizon. What are the technologies that are being worked upon? A good example is pulse shaping technologies, because optical transmission is about sending a symbol into the fiber. The fiber does all sorts of horrible things to that symbol on its journey along the fiber. So if you can pre-shape, if you can do something to that pulse that will make it more tolerant of its journey, then you can start to recover a lot more signal-to-noise ratio. What about further soft decision forward error correction enhancements? It's funny because harking back to that comment, everything that can be invented has been invented. A couple of years ago, people were saying, yeah, we may as well not work anymore on forward error correction because we've pretty much done as much as we can. But people are finding ways, as more powerful electronics becomes available, to innovate still further and draw more and more recovery from this soft decision forward error correction. Nonlinear compensation is an area that we're just starting to see some interesting results from. All of the limitations that we're seeing with coherent technology today generally fall into the pot of nonlinear effects. It's a very unusual effect in optical fiber. If you send a signal that's too powerful, you suddenly end up with lots of these horrible things happening to you. If you can compensate for them, then you could have much more efficient modulation in the fiber. The initial results on nonlinear compensation aren't exactly sparkling, but we just need a more powerful hardware really to make that work. Large area fiber is something you can also do to offset nonlinear effects. It is not to be confused with large effective aperture fiber. That's the fiber that's actually in the ground in a lot of Europe today. But large area fiber, which is not generally deployed, allows you to transmit with greater power before you hit the nonlinear threshold. It's been planned for some submarine systems, and people tend to use it for demonstrations of 16 QAM modulation. If you see a long distance on a 16 QAM modulation, it's almost certainly a large area fiber demo. And then finally, maybe we will bite the bullet and go beyond the C and L bands. There's the O band, E band, S band at shorter wavelengths, and then there's the U band at longer wavelengths. They all have their particular problems, particularly amplification technologies, but they will all give us more capacity. So in summary, we've had an astonishing innovation in the optical transmission industry over the past few decades. Have we eaten all the cashew nuts? No, I don't think so. Every time we take a cashew nut out of the bowl, there seems to be 2 more that appear. So I think we've got plenty more to go at. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. So it's good to see that there's still plenty of cashew nuts in the bowl there. I think Jeff touched on two areas I'd like to call back on here, which is the virtuous circle, as far as I see it, between innovation and invention. As an example of that, by the way, I happen to have with me here the centre of such a virtuous circle. So this is a Raspberry Pi developed in Cambridge as a small computer to try and encourage especially kids to get in touch with computing rather than just playing with GUIs, as indeed they seem to be able to do when they get out of high school. Another example, of course, the classic example is the World Wide Web. The web was invented, and then there's a huge amount of innovation around that. And another thing that Jeff touched on was metrics. So we've kind of touched on it a bit earlier as well. So Jeff came up with a useful metric there of capacity versus distance for WDM, for success for measurement of innovation in WDM. We actually, in Géant, we're trying to come up now with a set of key performance indicators, and we're now trying to work out what metrics should be in place for that. Anyway, I wanted to ask the question, because I think Jean-Luc touched on it earlier as well, which is, are standards, because Jean-Luc touched upon the issue of standards. And the question is, are standards, or engaging in standards, a trigger for innovation, or are they an inhibitor for innovation? So I wonder if anybody from the panel has any view on that particular question. Jeff?
It's difficult to generalize, but if I was forced to generalize, I'd probably say that over the long term, standards are a trigger for innovation. But over the short term, they can appear to be an inhibitor. Think about Ethernet. If Ethernet wasn't standard, it would be an absolute nightmare. It wouldn't have been a success. But over the shorter term, other technologies may actually inhibit manufacturers from investing because they think, well, we're not going to have a differentiator. But eventually, they will have to invest because, fortunately, even though I work for a manufacturer, I think it's a good thing that standards are around because and they're very often pushed by the customer community because they don't want to be trapped into a single vendor. So yes, I think longer term, I think they are a trigger for innovation.
Okay, Aphrodite.
In my experience, I fully agree with the comparison between short-term and long-term effects. I think in many of the Géant cases, standards have been a basis for innovation. There are a lot of times when ideas come in, but in order to invest in them, in order to define what would be an horizon to judge these ideas and deem them successful or non-successful would be to have a baseline of some standard specification or technology to use as a basis for the idea to evolve. And there's a lot of more confidence in the teams when they work upon a standard, whereas they're less, let's say, they're more insecure when they're not. And in many cases, in the other way around, working towards a very innovative idea can be, let's say, input for a standard. And this is the most difficult thing to do. It's a long discussion on this second point.
Were you going to make a point, Nicole?
Yes, I would like to give an example. If we do not have standards for the bandwidth on demand technology, then we would not have inter-domain bandwidth on demand. So we really need standards to globally work together on our RNE network.
Okay, so that's such as goes on in the OGF, for example, with the NSI interface. Yeah, Jean-Luc?
The environment of NRN is a natural environment for collaboration and cooperation. So from a funding point of view, we expect from this community to be advancing or at least putting requirements for such standards because there is little incentive for NRNs or géants to lock the customer normally and make the cost of switching very high. So normally these things should not be in the mindset of this community. So the expectation is that in the future there will be an even stronger role of the community, either in driving or either in even doing standards, which I have to say that in the past 10 years was relatively weak compared to the initial days of the NRNs, where individuals were contributing to standards and were stronger innovators in IATF, for instance.
Okay, so I mean, from what I've seen in the GEON projects over the years, there's been some contribution to the IETF, not as much as I suspect people would like to see, and to the OGF, but there's other standards bodies as well, where there's been virtually no interaction at all. So, the ITU springs to mind, for example. Okay, so can we touch a little bit? Are there any points from the audience on this notion of standardization, and or have the panelists touched it on? We'll have a question here from Brian.
Thank you. Yeah, Brian from Nordnet. I'm wondering if you do innovation in collaboration with other universities or companies, specifically, how do you share the IPR for that? Is there any, rules, regulations that sort of shares the IPR? Because usually you would see the company would like to, of course, sell the stuff, make a profit, and we would like to spread the idea within our community and our networks. So, and I think with all the open calls coming up, that might be a problem.
Certainly IPR has been a bit of a thorn in the side of some people in the GEON project over the years. Any comments from the panel on how to handle IPR?
Didn't Stanford University have a good track record for that? Because I don't know if it's still the case, but certainly around the time when Sun Microsystems and Cisco was formed, these were basically garage projects or classroom projects that came out of Stanford, and Stanford seemed to have a very open philosophy towards intellectual property rights. In fact, I don't think they got any money from it, really. But whether they're still doing that the same way now, I'm not sure. But people have often remarked to me that Stanford's model was a good one.
I think it's slightly different these days, isn't it? With the open, what's going on in the open ONF, actually, in terms of open. Any other comments from the audience on that particular point? IPR issues, whether or not they get in the way of group collaboration? Jean-Luc?
On IPR, up to now in the GEON project, there is an IPR policy, and it's a relatively stable environment with a number of partners. So those policies are accepted, and it's working well. Now with the open call, as it's correctly pointed there, we are going to open to new stakeholders, academic and industry too. So it's going to open, yes, you're right, a whole range of discussion. The idea is that the new beneficiary are agreeing on the IPR document, but I'm sure we'll have an interesting discussion with some of them, including commercial provider. By the way, I didn't mention, but the open call that was closed, so the GEON open call that was closed last week,
2 weeks ago.
29th of May, yeah, has received a very good number of response. There is 70 proposals of most of the cases consortia, little consortia of 2-3 partners. And the money requested for the 3.3 million euro budget available is 4 times this budget. So it shows a very good response from the stakeholders, from the extended community. It's a range of research institutes, universities, NRNs themselves, including a non-European one, and also industry. There is 20% industry participation in this call, and 10% of the proposal are led by industry, SME, or even larger company.
Okay. Okay, so are there any... I want to pose a question in a minute about whether innovation is better left to its own devices, or is there a place for organised attempts to organise innovation through projects? But are there any other questions before I ask anybody to address that? There's a hand up over there. If you could wait for the microphone to come to you, please.
Hi, Alessandra Cicchitano from Switch. I have a question for Jeff. So I was thinking during your presentation, so you talked about investing and believing in technologies, even when sometimes it looks like there is nothing more to do, and then something else comes up. And that made me think of switches. And how many years in the past there was almost nothing to do on switches because the technology was good enough. And then OpenFlow came up and mixed up again everything, and research is on switches again. But that took years. So I was wondering, and I was also curious to hear a commercial point of view. So does it always pay back to invest in a technology that is working even so well that you think there is not much to do? Or is there a point where we actually should give up and move on other fields and open our boundaries and invest somewhere else?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, but I think the way you ended the question, the way you summarized the question, almost answers it, because it wouldn't seem sensible to completely abandon any particular line of investigation. Although I have to say, you start to get polarized opinions in the development community. And the example that I gave, of course, was forward error correction. I was seeing presentations a couple of years ago. They showed the Shannon limits and the theoretical limits for hard decision and soft decision forward error correction. You'd see these on charts, you'd think, yeah, there's nothing more we can do here. But luckily, people don't abandon it. And I think it's a great thing about the diversity. Oh, abandon the product.
You wait till the microphone comes back, I'm afraid.
Yeah, sorry.
All right.
So, no, you keep on having the product and having something that works, but
Yep.
when it's about innovation, that's what I was more talking of. So it's not that you kill something that works. No, you keep that. But
Right.
it was more about innovation. So when is the time to just innovate something else? Because in a company, you don't invest money for years in something if it doesn't pay back. So you always have to find a balance with what goes out and comes in. So I was really thinking just about innovation.
Yeah, I wasn't actually talking about abandoning the product. What you would do is it would plateau off. So in other words, you wouldn't do any development on that particular part of the product. But it's not, I don't think it's a black and white situation, because even in companies that, what will happen is you'll tend to deprioritize a particular project because you might say, look, we're not going to get a return on that within a certain timescale. But engineers are very naughty. You know, they'll go off and they'll carry on developing things. And I mean, we've had this several times while I've worked at Infinera, and they've carried on developing. They'll say, look, come and have a look what I've done, with no resources and in my lunch hour. And it's usually a proof of concept that will take a lot more development. But really what I'm trying to say is I don't think it's a gray area. I don't think it's a black and white situation. I think it's a shades of gray and about how much priority. And certainly not shutting people down, which I think is a point that you want to make, is like even in directed development, you don't want to shut ideas down. I think that's a very important point to make.
I think to the point that Dave Lambert made yesterday, actually, about the origins of Facebook. So creating an environment in which bright young things can can have some flash of inspiration or whatever the motivation is for it, and come up with something innovative. And I think also about the Google 20% time as well, allegedly, where they have a fifth of their time to do whatever, their own pet project, and maybe something will come out of it. I think I saw a hand coming up from Jim Williams over there, so we'll send the microphone over to you.
So Jim Williams from Indiana University. So this is going to eventually turn out to be a question for Jean-Luc, but I think innovation is a tricky bit, and so I want to use the example that he brought up. You have 70 proposals to your open call, and you're not going to be able to fund, what, 10% of them?
Yeah.
So as a funder with public money, how do you fit innovation or radical innovation into the requirement that you fund things that are going to have benefit and are going to succeed? Those are very, very difficult things to balance out, in my perspective, particularly in the public sector. In the private sector, you have the money force that dominates everything. But in the public sector, it seems like a difficult bit to me.
Before Jean-Luc tries to answer that, are there any other panelists can make a point there? Aphrodite, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, having been involved, I think the process that you're asking for has started before even launching the open call, because there has been a number of people in the Jean community who have sat for quite a long time thinking about the topics that would be announced, so that these 70 proposals are not coming out of everywhere. We have set down a set of topics for them. And in this set of topics, we tried to combine ideas and brilliant new prospects together with our sense of what our user community needs. And this ties back to the question from Alexandra before, because there could be many cases where some engineer engineers are working on a brilliant new idea, or some people in Stanford invented OpenFlow. But the moment when these really kicked off was when there was some user interest for some of the capabilities for these technologies. So what we tried to do even before reaching the point of having 70 proposals to evaluate, in the phase of determining the topics for this open call, was trying out of all the different high-end and new ideas that were coming out of the project, try to prioritize and select those that were presenting a potential use case interest in users, an application in our NREN community. And now the evaluation out of the 70 proposals is in
I like what you say. In other words, when the problem is well described, it's already half answered. So the way the community, Dante and all the NRNs explore these topics, there are 18 of them, and if you look at them, they are going in a great level of details, and they are themselves gold, because they are advancing in terms of what should be done, the next steps. And I consider these topics as already a success. Now, if Commission would have done it, would have put 2 sentences, I innovate progress of networking, research on education, networking, blah, blah. And we would have a very different answer. The value that the community brought to this process is that they have been able to really define what is needed, because they know what is needed. Commission doesn't know. Now, for the number of proposals, yes, there is a variety depending on the topic, but overall, I much prefer a ratio of, let's say, 1 to 4, as I mentioned, for the budget request, than 1 to 1. By the way, this is géant, but I shouldn't say that. But in terms of research and innovation, it means that the topic is too narrow and there is little competition there. Or on the other side, a ratio of 1 to 10, for instance. So €1 available, 10 requested, which would mean that the topics are extremely vague. So no, I think this is both on the description and the first response is a good first step. The next step, as you mentioned, is the evaluation. So it will happen over summer, and then hopefully some negotiation will start early autumn. But thanks for the community for this this effort.
So this looks like a success story so far. Michael, would you like to make a comment on that?
Yes, I got to know about this call when you told me about it last month. And I was curious to see that so many of the 18 items were for only one project to be approved. And that means that, you know, the other, I don't know how many who applied for the same thing are out. You know, they're excluded from the process. And it reminds me of the Genie project when it started, which specifically tried to induce multiple projects with the same ends. And this led to exploration of different ideas which weren't in one of the proposals, but in several.
Right.
And I think that this also is something that should be considered. I think that participating in a call where there is only one winner is not a very healthy exercise for those who don't manage to make it.
Okay. Interesting point. Jean-Luc?
No, I think that's a very good point. This is something we should reflect on, is this capacity to have 2 or 3 competitive early development and at one point going to the next step. I think this is a model that you know probably a bit better than us, and I think Canada is also another extension of this model.
Yeah.
So, and it's also echoing some practice in the standardization body. IATF requires, as far as I remember, 3 differently developed stack for achieving the standard status that works and that interoperates. So we are more than keen to consider that. Of course, we have some also to consider the budget limit.
Okay, thank you. So we're short of time now. I'm coming towards the end of the session. I'd like to ask, if I may, Steve Wolf at the front here has been making a few notes. He kindly agreed to reprise the role he did yesterday. So I'd invite Steve to come up and make a few comments, a few observations of what he's seen this afternoon. And then, panelists, I'd like you to maybe make a pithy statement like you did yesterday, like the panelists did yesterday, rather, before we close. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Michael. Is this on? Yes,
Yes,
I guess it is. Well, this has been a very interesting discussion. I took away a number of points, probably more than the last time I tried this exercise. One of the most salient ones that I thought came from SurfNet, and in some sense, innovation, there are those who innovate and those who do not, right? And we mustn't be ashamed of admitting to a meritocracy. And the notion is, let those who can do, right? If you can't, you know, you're either part of the solution or part of the problem. If you can't contribute, please get out of the way. There was a notion that there are a lot of tensions in both the innovation process and in the funding agencies process. Tensions between R versus D, operations versus innovation, scale, technology push versus user pull, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And all this is, you know, innovation is not a game for sissies. You have to be tough. I think perhaps the most important point to me that I got from there, innovation as a catalyst for growth. Innovation breeds innovation, and that is absolutely true. There's the old saw that unlike physical objects, if you have information and you give it away, you have lost nothing. Innovation breeds innovation, information breeds information. That's what I got out of it.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Steve.
you.
Very useful, thank you indeed. So we've seen there the virtuous circle again, the notion we shouldn't be afraid of a meritocracy, allow those that can go ahead and do it maybe on their own to have the freedom to do so. And Steve touched on the tensions we've seen there between funding models and sort of true innovation and the freedoms that it often seems to require. So, panelists, if I could ask you just to make maybe one pithy statement before we close, something that a single point that you would like to make that you've introduced, just reiterating you've said something you said in your talk or something you've heard this afternoon during the discussion. I'll just go down the line, I think, starting with Jeff, please.
Well, Infinera is an innovator in photonic integrated circuit technology, and it was an interesting area because we were told a good project to innovate is when 50% of the experts in the field tell you you can't do it. And with photonic integration, 100% of the experts in the field told us we couldn't do it. But satisfaction in proving them wrong is so much better when 100% of the experts tell you it's not possible.
So take a risk.
Yeah, take a risk.
I would like to repeat Steve. If you cannot contribute to the innovation process, just get out of the way.
Okay, it's a clear message. We've heard that a few times during this week. Aphrodite.
I want to say that although most of the press releases coming out of GEANT in the last few years are quite impressive, I would like to go back to my teams and tell them that the world is around us, is still striving for innovation, and that they should never give up.
This is the motivation factor
Exactly,
you talked about
yes.
earlier on. Jean-Luc.
Not everybody has the capability to maybe do innovation, but I strongly believe that there are brains everywhere, and we should not miss the opportunity of tapping into this resource. So I would put the emphasis on people rather than organization in doing innovation. So it's about people. It's also a way for this community to nurture this generation of an innovator, to give them possibility to express wherever they are and to be part of this game, and to give them a career perspective, which is not always easy, and also to give them nice stuff to do and fun.
Create the innovation, create the environment, and then the
keeping the
collaborative
balance
innovation will come out of that. Michael.
One of the things that has been most impressive in the experience we've had over the last 12 years or so is that we've tapped into a stream of inventors, if you like, or people who've been developing projects, student projects or as group projects within their universities, and these would have stayed there had it not been the happy circumstance that RNP had invented this idea of financing practical application of these ideas and putting as a goal to develop something which could be used more widely. And so, I think this is an important lesson that this is growing, the capacity to do this, because the students, the number of students and researchers in the area in which we work is increasing, and so the ideas, I think, are even more so.
So the resource for crowdsourcing essentially is increasing.
If you wish to put it that way.
Okay, right. So we're now at the end of our period. Please, would you thank our panelists? I think they've done a very good job this afternoon.